Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable member for Carleton.
Ministers are banned from owning stocks. That's because we don't want them to use their power to help the companies they own or inside information to unduly profit. This minister used a loophole to get around that ban by just putting the stocks in a numbered company in Alberta. Simple question. Has this minister owned other stocks in his numbered companies?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it's important that Canadians have confidence in our government. I had a constructive discussion with the Ethics Commissioner this morning. I informed her of my continuing goal of working with her. I also told her of my intent to sell all my family's shares in my former family firm, Morneau Chappell, to move forward with a blind trust. And I told her it was the intent of myself and my family to donate any difference in value in my family shares from the time I was elected on October 19th, 2015, until now. This is the way that we will keep confidence.
The honourable member for Carleton. Order.
Thank the minister for his answer. If he hadn't owned those stocks over the last 2 years, while ministers are banned from owning stocks, then he wouldn't have had those profits in the first place. Can he confirm now if he will donate the resulting tax savings that he will enjoy from the charitable tax credit to help pay off his deficit?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, it's so important that Canadians have confidence that we're working for them on their behalf. That's why, on this side of the House, we lift up to the highest standards of integrity. That's why I'm taking forward and taking these steps, which I know will help Canadians to have real confidence in our government. And I do hope that all members of this House will consider their affairs in a similar fashion, making sure that they can hold up to scrutiny and do it in a way that has confidence of Canadians that we're working on their behalf.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality is this minister was caught holding an offshore company without referring it to the Ethics Commissioner. Then he was caught by Canadians continuing to own shares in his family business. Now, after being caught, he's put that money in a blind trust, but he's asking us to blindly trust him about the roughly half-dozen other numbered companies he continues to own. Why doesn't he just tell us what is inside those companies?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said to this House, the confidence of Canadians is so important in what we're doing. As I've also said, I've worked with the Ethics Commissioner and followed her recommendations. As I've said, I'm going to go farther than that. What's really important, Mr. Speaker, is that allows us to do the work that we do on behalf of Canadians, allows us to keep growing the economy, allows us to keep growing jobs for Canadians across our country. We are in an excellent situation right now where we can actually ensure Canadians continue to be successful, with an increase in the Canada Child Benefit, with an increase in the working income tax benefit. This will help Canadians over the long term.
The honourable member for Richmond-Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to give you a simple mathematical equation. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. So, A, the Minister of Finance, gave $400 million to Bombardier. B, Bombardier is a client of Morneau Chappell. C, the Minister of Finance has been collecting $65,000 in monthly dividends since he became minister. That's called the QED principle in math. What was to be shown? Need I say more so that the minister understand that he is in a conflict of interest? The Honourable Minister for Economic Development.
Clear. A, we believe in the aerospace sector. B, we believe in aerospace sector jobs. C, we believe in growth. D, we believe in investing in employees in Canada, Mr. Speaker. That's what we've been doing. All of the above, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to invest in the aerospace sector. We'll continue to make sure we have good quality jobs in Canada, Mr. Speaker. That's the bottom line.
I'm delighted that members know their letters. But I encourage them to remember to know the standing orders and not to interrupt. The honourable member.
The honourable member
Richmond Athabasca.
for Richmond Athabasca. Thank you. This is so fascinating to see how proud the Liberals are to support the aerospace sector in Alabama and the United States. Mr. Speaker, Morneau Shepell, let's get back to basics here. Morneau Shepell has interests in Bombardier, the Bank of Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, the Senate, CATSA, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. That totals for Morneau Shepell $14 million worth of contracts with the government. What more is it going to take to understand that the Minister of Finance is in a conflict of interest? The Honourable Minister for Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is absolutely correct. Of course we support the aerospace sector. These are 208,000 good quality jobs that on average pay 60% more than other manufacturing jobs. This is an industry that contributes $28 billion into our economy. This is an industry that helps our small and medium-sized enterprises. 800 suppliers across the country, Mr. Speaker, will continue to defend the aerospace sector, will continue to invest in employees, and will continue to make sure the economy continues to grow.
Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Les-Basques.
Mr. Speaker, I could not care less about the finance minister's fortune. What I do care about is governance and plain old-fashioned common sense. And common sense is telling us that the finance minister controlled, directly or indirectly, a massive interest in Morneau Shepell. And the finance minister tabled Bill C-27, for which he actually lobbied prior to him being elected in this House. And because Bill C-27 would benefit Morneau Shepell, he stood to benefit from this transaction. How can he not see that this constitutes conflict of interest?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I will continue to work on behalf of Canadians. That's what we were elected to do. We very clearly said when we came into office that we would focus on ensuring retirement dignity for Canadians. This is a broader goal. We've been working on it since day one. The enhancement to the Canada Pension Plan was a really important step for the future. Of course, moving back to age 65, the old age security, which was so quickly moved to 67 by the previous government, was really important. And going one step further to help 900,000 seniors with an increase in the guaranteed income supplement was critically important. We will continue to fight for retirement dignity for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
Order.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Les-Basques.
Higher standards of ethics. Let's see how it fares.
In 2002, the Minister of National Defence had to resign from the Liberal cabinet because of a $36,500 contract awarded to a company belonging to his ex-girlfriend. In the same year, the Solicitor General had to resign from the Liberal cabinet because he had awarded a $6.5 million contract to a college where his brother was a principal. Morneau Shepell's share of profits, including the $1 million or $2 million held by the Minister of Finance, jumped to 5% after Bill C-27 was tabled. How can he not see that this is a conflict of interest? What's his definition of a conflict of interest? Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, confidence in our government is very important to us. What I said is that I am going to continue to follow the recommendations of the Ethics Commissioner. I'm going to go above and beyond. I'm going to sell my and my family's shares in the company. I will have a blind trust. And I also stated today that my family and myself decided that we would donate the difference in value of our shares since I came to this position. That is what we are going to do. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, this House voted unanimously in favour of Rona Ambrose's bill on sexual assault training for judges. This training is absolutely necessary to raise awareness amongst judges and to encourage women to come forward in cases of sexual assault and harassment. It is more important to act quickly now on this file. Unfortunately, the bill has now been stalled in the Senate. It is absolutely unacceptable that an unelected Senate be able to stall an initiative that was unanimously passed in this House? Will the Prime Minister stand with us and call on the Senate to act rapidly so that Bill C-337 is passed?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the honourable member. Sexual assault is completely unacceptable, and our government has an unwavering commitment to ensure that victims of sexual assault are treated with fairness, with dignity, and with respect. I was incredibly proud to stand with all members of this House to move forward the private member's bill C-337 into the other place. I hope that this moves forward to provide the necessary training and encourage necessary training for the judiciary, and recognize that we will continue, in absence of that, to do everything we can as a government to ensure that we provide.
The Honourable Member for Hamilton Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, more is possible. The Liberals just need the backbone to make it happen. Everyone knows our bankruptcy legislation is failing to protect Canadian workers. Workers know it, companies know it, we know it, and so do the Liberals. In fact, a Liberal member of Don Valley West said this legislation needs to be amended and that he hopes the government looks into it. So again, will the Liberals do what's right and change bankruptcy and insolvency laws? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the member for his advocacy and his hard work. I understand the concerns that he's raising with respect to pensions, and we as a government have been very clear that we support secure pensions as well. That's why we introduced the Canada Pension Plan and enhancements to that. And that's why we'll work with Sears employees during this difficult time. That's why we've also held 82 different sessions through Service Canada to assist these employees during this difficult time as well. We'll continue to make sure that we have secure pensions and assist workers as they go through bankruptcy, through the bankruptcy process, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance told us that he recused himself twice from discussions, given all the conflict of interest situations he has found himself in. The problem is that Canadians are having trouble believing him. There are many conflicts of interest, starting with, say, Bill C-227, C-27, that he tabled, given his dealings with Bombardier and other issues. To solve this once and for all, will the Finance Minister disclose all his assets so that Canadians will know what all his conflict situations are? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I think it's very important to work with the Ethics Commissioner in order to make sure that she is fully aware of our situation. That's exactly what I did. I followed her recommendations, and I said that I am going to do even more. As I said, I am going to sell my Morneau Chapelle shares. I am also going to take another step. I am going to donate the difference in value of these shares since I was elected. That is very important.
Order. Honourable Député.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance is admitting then that he was in a conflict of interest. That's why he's doing this, and I'm sure there are other conflicts of interest. Canadians are having trouble believing him. They want to know the whole truth. Now, I understand that the Minister of Finance thought he could just keep his assets to himself, but since he has become minister, since he was elected, his assets actually concern all Canadians. Did the minister recuse himself other times when he was in a conflict of interest? Honourable Minister of Finance.
I think it's very important that Canadians have confidence in our government and that we're working for them. And we know that we can assure them of that situation because we work together with the Commissioner to make sure that she understands all of our situations. For all members of this House, I can say that I will continue to work hard on behalf of Canadians, making sure that, as I have not had for the last 2 years, I don't have conflicts of interest going forward. That's critically important. That allows us to get at the very important work that we're doing on behalf of Canadians, making a real difference for families today and tomorrow.
Order. The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister lobbied for target benefit pension plans while he was the Executive Chair of Morneau Chappelle, which manages those exact plans. Days after he himself tabled a bill that sets them up, his company's stock's value jumped by millions of dollars. But the PM and the Finance Minister see nothing wrong with using public powers to grow private family fortunes. Meanwhile, Canadians have no idea what else the minister's hiding in his many other numbered companies and trust funds.
That's not okay.
It's time for him to come clean. What else is the minister hiding?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we do have a process in this country, we do have a process in this House for dealing with our assets. All the members of this House, ministers at this House, ministers before me have dealt with it in a similar way. That's working with the Commissioner of Ethics. That is what I've done. In following all of her recommendations, I've assured Canadians that I'm meeting up to their high standards. I've decided to go further. I've decided not only to sell all of my and my family's assets in the company I built with my father for 25 years, I've also decided to donate any difference in value in those shares from the time I was elected until now. Working together with the Ethics Commissioner will allow us to continue.
I want to remind members that, of course, when they're heckling, they may be taking a question away from one of their colleagues. No member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, last week a spokeswoman for Morneau Chappelle admitted those new target benefit plans will increase work for the firm. So the minister's law benefits the minister's family company that's been paying him the whole time. And it turns out Morneau Chappelle also does pension work for Bombardier. Of course, the PM and the Finance Minister gave hundreds of millions of tax dollars to Bombardier. What a tangled web we weave. Will the Finance Minister be honest with Canadians and finally reveal what else he's hiding?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, why do the opposition continually undermine the aerospace sector? When our government stood up and said we're going to contribute $372.5 million for more research and development, they opposed that. When our aerospace sector was under attack by the U.S. and particularly by Boeing, they went missing. And now, Mr. Speaker, we're trying to work with the company to make sure they have greater market access. And again, they're trying to undermine the aerospace sector. We will defend aerospace sector jobs. We will defend the aerospace sector suppliers, Mr. Speaker, because it's important for our economy.
The Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope.
Mr. Speaker, if it was up to the Finance Minister, Canadians would have never known that he was both an owner of Morneau Chappelle and the regulator. And now he wants us to throw him a parade for 2 years later, having finally done what he said he was going to do the first day he took office. Right. He has a conflict of interest because of his Morneau Chappelle shares, which were sheltered in a numbered company. He has 7 or 8 more such numbered companies hiding his other assets. When will he finally come clean with Canadians and reveal all of his assets so they can determine how many conflicts of interest he's in?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I fully understand why the members opposite want to obsess on my personal situation. What they don't want is Canadians to hear about the rosy economic picture that we presented this week. We presented Canadians with a situation that really has not been one they've seen since before the previous government, and that is a growth rate that's the best in a decade. What they've also seen is more jobs for them and their families. So the level of confidence in our country is going up. That's what's allowing us to continue to invest and put our faith in Canadians. We'll continue to do that and not obsess about things that really aren't about our big objective, making a difference for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Canadians don't have faith in this minister because he misled them when he said he would put his assets in a blind trust. He forgot that he had Morneau Chappelle shares when he was the regulator. He forgot about his French villa in an offshore corporation, and now we should just believe him that he has no more conflict of interest, Mr. Speaker. Canadians don't believe this minister, so why doesn't he just come clean, disclose all of his assets so Canadians can know how many more conflicts of interest he's in?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite well knows, the way that we work in this House is we work with the Ethics Commissioner to make sure that she understands at a very granular level all of our assets. And that is exactly what I did. By disclosing all of my assets, I allowed her to provide me recommendations, which I followed.
A member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge, I'd ask to come to order and not to be heckling throughout the answer.
The Honourable Member for Appy-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, even though his government ignored 3 court orders on appropriate funding levels for health services for Indigenous children, yesterday the Minister of Indigenous Services said that in fact it's the provinces that should have been brought before the Human Rights Tribunal. If that's how the Liberals treat their most important relationship, imagine how they're treating others. It's not the provinces who were found guilty of discrimination, it was this government. When will the Liberals stop blaming others, take responsibility, and end discrimination? Honourable Minister.
Member opposite, as well as all members in this House, recognize the very severe circumstances that Indigenous children are facing, with more than 50% of the children in care in this country being Indigenous children. We have to all work together to address this very serious problem. That requires Indigenous leaders, it requires the federal government, it requires provinces and territories and child and family services agencies. We've got to get this right, and everyone needs to be involved.
Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, their names are Chantal Fox and Joanne Winter. They were 12 years old and they were loved. And this government was found culpable in their deaths. Specifically, the minister's department's refusal to respond in what was known to be a, quote, life and death situation. So the minister is in federal court, not to clarify, but to, quote, quash the order. $6 million of taxpayers' money has been wasted fighting First Nation children in court. So for Chantal, for Jolynn, for all the other children falling through the crack, will this minister just call off your lawyers and do the right thing and end that federal court case today?
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay, is an experienced member and knows that he should be redirecting his comments to the chair. The honourable minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the member opposite the lengths to which we have gone to make sure that Jordan's principle is fully implemented. This makes sure that every child will get access to the care they need. Up until our government took power, we did not have resources for this. We now have hundreds of millions of dollars of resources. Close to 19,000 cases have been requested. We are working to make sure that every child will get access to the care they need and making sure that it's done right.
I'm afraid I have to ask the honourable member for North Island, Pell River not to be heckling throughout the answer. And the honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, not only did the finance minister mislead Canadians about putting his investments in a blind trust, today the Globe and Mail is reporting that the minister's so-called ethical screen is being enforced by his political staff, not Finance Canada officials. The finance minister keeps saying that Canadians should trust the ethics commissioner, but what he's really telling us to do is trust his Liberal staff. Does the minister expect Canadians to trust a system that's being enforced by someone who was hired by and reports to the minister himself?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, for clarity, the Ethics Commissioner suggested a conflicts of interest screen. The way that screen is administered, which is consistent with the previous government's approach, is that the Department of Finance identifies the issues that should be put forward as conflicts of interest, and then that is administered through my Chief of Staff. Entirely consistent with approaches in the past. In my estimation, one that's been working and one that will continue to make sure works.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil. Order.
It's in fact not at all consistent, Mr. Speaker. He hides behind this so-called ethical screen, but it turns out his political staffer is the only person enforcing it. Really, Mr. Speaker, an ethical screen needs to be enforced by departmental officials, not someone who relies on the minister for employment. This is a complete farce. We now know that for 2 years, the only person policing the minister's ethics is his senior political staffer. When will the finance minister disclose what else he's hiding in the web of numbered companies to finally ensure that no more conflicts of interest exist?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know what to say other than the member opposite is flat out wrong. The situation that we've been using has been an appropriate conflict of interest screen as recommended by the Ethics Commissioner. What I've said is we're going to go farther. This is the way that we get confidence from Canadians to continue doing the work that we want to do. The reason we're getting deflected on these sorts of issues is because the members opposite don't want to acknowledge what their constituents are feeling. And that's confidence in our economy, confidence that their children and grandchildren are going to be better off. Because the things that we're doing, Mr. Speaker, they're making a real difference for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, Canadians aren't fools. What the Minister of Finance just said at the beginning of question period is very simple. In other words, for 2 years, he has been in a clear conflict of interest, and he only acts when he's caught with his hand in the cookie jar. That's what the Minister of Finance did, and it's unacceptable. Canadians aren't fools, Mr. Speaker. But we know what's been happening. For days and days, he's been saying, no, I'm fine, I have an ethics screen. Well, the ethics screen is his chief of staff. So how can we have confidence in that? Just like the Globe and Mail said this morning, when will the Minister of Finance act in the interests of all Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Finance.
To repeat, the Commissioner said that the conflicts of interest screen was the best measure to ensure that there were no conflicts. All I can assume is that the member opposite is actually questioning the Commissioner. That's not what I'm doing. What I am saying is that the Commissioner's recommendations I follow, that I've decided to go several steps further. Mr. Speaker, this is what allows us to continue on the work that we're doing for Canadians, the work that we will, no matter what, continue making a real difference for families today. Things like the Canada Child Benefit, the Working Income Tax Benefit, they make a real difference and will help people to see better outcomes.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to help the Minister of Finance to understand, on behalf of all Canadians, when there's a conflict of interest, it takes a third party to help us think clearly, not your chief of staff, not the one who's on your payroll, someone who will think independently. And that's everything that didn't happen under the Minister of Finance. What is the Minister of Finance still hiding in terms of its other numbered companies? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, there is a reason why the member wants to talk about my finances. It's because he doesn't want to talk about the finances of Canadians, but that is what we want to do. We want to continue working for Canadians, all Canadians. And we have been absolutely clear. It's very important to improve the lives of Canadian families, to sustain strong economic growth. That's our goal. That's what's important to us, and that's what I'm going to continue doing.
The Honourable